So my name is Carol Mahoney. I am really glad for all of you who have come here today, and I'm actually really excited to share with you some of the things that I've learned, observed, and researched about how to successfully hire salespeople. So before we get too far, a little bit about me. I am the founder of Unbound Growth. It is a scientific sales development firm, and our focus is really on sales coaching. So you might be asking yourself, as some may, why is a sales coach talking about hiring? The reason I started getting into sales coaching was that I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. And the beginning of my career was working with technology startup companies and their sales and marketing teams to help them to grow revenue. And I saw firsthand both the experience that I had with my family growing up in their businesses, as well as the startup companies that I worked in later on, about the damage that can happen to a company with a bad sales hire. It's heartbreaking. I survived it and had it happen in my own company. And not only is it heartbreaking, it's bank breaking. And what I learned after coaching sales leaders and salespeople on the front lines for several years now is that a lot of times that I was brought into companies to try and coach people into positions that they weren't right for. And a lot of times probably shouldn't have been put into that position because it didn't play to their strengths. And they had a lot of work to do to try to overcome their weaknesses to be successful in that position. Not only did I find that a lot of my coaching was ineffective because the person wasn't in the right role, but they also got started off on the worst possible foot. And so I had to try and go in to actually try and fix things rather than actually make the changes to make them improve. And so I started looking into what does it take to have a successful sales hire? And I realized that the companies that I worked with and got the best results with had critical keys in their sales hiring process that set the salespeople up for success. So I'm going to share a couple of those with you today. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to describe to you the problem as I've seen it, experienced it, and observed it. And then I'm going to share with you two crucial keys. First one being, how do you find and attract and hire the right salesperson? And then we're going to talk a little bit about what does it take to onboard that salesperson so that they ramp up and they actually get started off on the right foot in their company. There's going to be a few resources that I'm going to mention throughout this presentation, and so when you get an email from us tomorrow that has a link to it, it's going to have all of those in there as well as the slides and the notes and everything, so you don't have to worry about taking notes. Remember that freezing cold weather that we got a couple of weeks ago where it hurt to go outside and breathe and you couldn't blink because your eyelashes were frozen to your head? This is my husband, Steve. Steve is right now in the snow on I-95 during one of those freezing cold days trying to change a tire. And we were on our way to a family Christmas party, and it was about an hour away, and this is on I-95. I hate being late. So as he's pulling off the road, I'm pulling out my phone and getting ready to dial AAA, and he's like, no, I got this, I can do this. So out goes poor Steve into the freezing cold. First thing that happened is that the jack that we had didn't have the screw or the handle that he needed to actually pump up the jack to get the thing off, right? Because for some reason those are always the pieces that go missing. So instead he had to use this flimsy four-way screwdriver and slowly turn the jack up so that he could try and get it off. Then he didn't have any gloves with him, so he had to borrow my gloves because there's no way I was going outside to change this tire. And he's 6'4", and so my little gloves didn't exactly fit his hands, but he made do. Then lastly, of course, as you can see, where I had to take a picture of it, of course. We're over and we're at the side of the road, and you can kind of see where the jack isn't quite into the road. And so the jack kept slipping, and so every time he was just about to get it high enough that he'd get the bad tire off, it would slip and fall out. And so, of course, if you've ever seen that movie Christmas Story with Ralphie, who's in the back trying to change the tire with his dad, and he says fudge a lot, Steve is saying some other choice words as well. So as he's trying to change this tire, of course, I'm sitting nice and warm in the car, and every 10 minutes or so, and I'm opening the door and peeking my head out and saying, so, how's it going out there? Because in my hand, I've got the AAA on the phone ready to start dialing because I'm like, there's no way that we're going to make it there in time. And then, of course, AAA said they're going to take 90 minutes to get there. So I'm like, all right, so do I call AAA and let the clock start ticking? Or do I place my bet on the fact that maybe he's going to be able to pull this off despite all of the mishaps that have been happening? Luckily, he was able to fix the tire. We were able to get to the party, and we were only a little bit late. The story, though, illustrates exactly what a lot of salespeople go through on their first 3 days on the job. They've just been hired into a sales position. They're under pressure to learn up things quickly, but they're unprepared, in less than an ideal environment, and with tools that don't quite cut it. And like Steve, they're muttering to themselves, fudge, now what? And then, of course, there's the sales leaders who are tasked with driving revenue for the company. And like me, they're sticking their head in every 10 minutes to see how it's going. And like my husband, he's telling them to stay in the car and let me do my job. But I'm anxious, just like a sales leader. Are we going to get there on time, despite all of the flat tires? Should we just cut our losses now, let these salespeople go and replace it, and let AAA come to the rescue? So needless to say, for Steve and I, we get to the party on time. But for a bad sales hire, the cost of that is way, way greater. If you're not sure, though, what a cost of a bad sales hire is, there'll be a link, and there's an app for that. So you can actually calculate what it would cost for you to hire the wrong salesperson and the damage that that could do to your business, both short-term and long-term. Now, sourcing and finding a sales position in your company is different than any other position that you're going to fill. The reason is simply this. When I actually first started in my first SaaS technology startup, I worked directly with the VPs of sales, and I ran marketing, which sounds way more impressive than it was because it was just the two of us. However, we did add on to the team later on. And I remember as I was sitting in the interview, one person asked me, and I don't remember who, said, "So how is it that you think that you can contribute to the sales effort?" Now, I was in college. Nowhere on my resume did it say salesperson, because that was yucky. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, if I can sell you on the idea of hiring me, I'm pretty sure I got the sales things down. I got the job, and I learned a lot about how to sell myself and my ideas in that first job. And that's exactly what salespeople are doing when they're applying for positions. They're selling themselves. That's what they do for a living. They're studying how to sell themselves in an interview. What chance do you think you have to be able to see through that and see what's real and what's not? And so that's why these next two keys that I'm going to share with you are absolutely crucial to understanding what the best salesperson is for your company. So the very first step of the very first key is identifying what the ideal profile is for your salesperson. Now there's 34 questions that I will ask sales leaders in order to identify what's the criteria for the position you're trying to fill. So first we'll find out, well, what exactly is the position? Are we talking about major account position? Is this an inside sales position? Are they going to be an outside sales position? Are they going to be a channel account manager? Then we also want to look at how difficult is this position going to be? And difficulty is determined by both the selling environment and who they're selling to. Are they selling to stakeholders in C-level companies? Or are they selling something that's more transactional that anybody could buy? Then we're also going to be looking at things like, what are the requirements of the job? So if it's an inside sales position, what are the requirements that are going to be necessary? Is it going to be an inbound sales position? Is it going to be something where it's outbound and they're going to have to make a lot of calls? Is it an account management position where they're dealing with existing accounts and need to grow those accounts? And then, of course, there's always the questions about market. Are they selling into an industrial or a corporate world? Are they selling to small business owners? Are they selling to consumers or residential? Or are they selling into institutions like schools or hospitals or municipalities? All of these are factors that are going to affect the kind of salesperson that's going to work best in this role. And then, of course, there's the buyer. Everything needs to revolve around the buyer, just as Lisa said. And so in this case, who is the buyer? Is it the C-suite? Is it middle management that they're selling to? Are they selling to the end user? Are they selling to consumers? Are they selling to influencers? We also want to ask questions about what kind of resistance are they going to get during the sales process? Is this something where people are going to be resisting a lot to the ideas and solutions that they have? Or are they clamoring for it and there's absolutely no resistance at all? Then, of course, we want to ask about the competition, and that seems to be the thing that everybody is focused on. But in competition in terms of, is it a crowded marketplace? Are you selling marketing automation software where there's 5,000 different people in that particular space? Or are you selling something that's very unique, like industrial autonomous vehicles that don't require a person to drive? Of course, then pricing is going to be an issue. Are they selling something that has a high value, like less than $1,000 or more than $250,000? Is their average order value, what is that going to be? Are they higher or lower than their competition? And then, of course, there's the question of what else is there an option that people can do? And of course, we also want to understand what happens after the sale in this role. Is the salesperson going to be required to simply find new accounts, bring them on, and then walk away? Or are they going to be required to develop relationships with that account ongoing? And then, last but not least, the last two things are opportunity creation. Who's creating the opportunities? Is this salesperson need to have hunting skills where they find their own leads, or are they going to be handed to them? And this is also one of the things that most people don't think about, and that's their culture and selling environment. Is your culture going to be a fast-paced, always changing, high-pressure kind of a situation, or is it going to be something autonomous? Will they be working on-site or off-site? What's the environment that they're going to be into, and are they going to be comfortable and compatible with that? Now, once you have your profile, and it really sounds like there's a lot of questions that need to be asked and answered, but then once you've got those answers, you can then use that criteria to write the ad. And the number one thing about writing the ad is this: it's not about you. It's not about your company, it's not about your product, it's not about the last rate funding that you got, it's not even about the wall of candy in your break room. It has to be about the person that you're trying to attract. Your ad should not be a job description, but it should be a description of the person you're trying to attract. What's their attitude like? What are their attributes and their competencies? What does a day in the life in this role in your company look like to them? In addition to writing the ad so that it appeals to the salesperson that you're trying to attract, you also don't want to just write one ad and then put it everywhere for everybody. Depending on where you place it, there's going to be different audiences. So change the title of the ad to grab the attention of the audience in that particular place, whether you're going to network for that or if you're going to place it in place for veterans programs or at universities. Different audience, different title, different attraction. And in addition to the ad making sure that you have it on the job boards and those places, you also want to make sure that the ad is a reflection of what it's going to be like to work there. Once you've attracted some candidates, you say you've put out your ad, and now you have some people that are sending their resumes in. Now, if you've ever tried to hire anyone in any position, you know that resumes are, well, let's just say fluff. And so it's not always easy to decide what are the capabilities that actually this person has. And even in addition to that, you can go through lots of interviewing processes trying to find out, does this person have the capabilities to do this job? And the only thing that you have to rely on is how well they're selling you in that interview. However, by using an objective data-based assessment, you can actually measure with your criteria, does this person have the capabilities, the attitudes, and the behaviors required to be successful in this job? And because you haven't spent all of your interviewing time trying to answer those questions, and there's going to be some bias there, now you can actually use that objective findings and the criteria of your ad to determine who do you spend your time interviewing and how do you interview them. Because the beauty of it is that now you can use the data in there to verify, is this person actually going to be a right fit for our company? Which brings me down to the interviews that you're actually going to do. Data without context is dangerous. And that's why we then, after we have the data and the criteria, we craft our interviews and our questions based on the findings in the assessment as well as the criteria of the ad. So you can ask questions that reflect back to the ad. Tell me about a time where you did X, which is written in your ad. Or how would you handle a situation like this and how did you go about that? Or if you have that person's particular findings and it shows something that you need to ask about, you can ask about that. So there's actually an example of a client this past week that I worked with who had 3 candidates that they were assessing for a position. And in their particular role, account management and relationship building skills were absolutely critical. And the top 2 candidates that came back, their strongest suits were in everything else except for account management and relationship building skills, but everything else was wonderful. So it's not that we got the perfect candidate, but now we have the information as to what kinds of questions should we ask this candidate to see if, 1, they're going to be coachable so that we can help them to improve those skills, and 2, now we know if we hire this person, we know exactly what it is that we're going to have to help and train and coach them on for them to ultimately be successful. The last thing about using data in your interviews is that once you've gotten that information, now you can look for those, what I call intangibles. How much do they look you in the eye? What's their presence like? Are they curious? How much do they care? And so you can start to interview for the things that maybe you can't measure on a data sheet, but you need to know if you're going to feel comfortable with this person representing you in your company. Now, once you have found the salesperson of your dreams, now what do you do with them? And this is where a lot of times sales hiring falls short because they put a lot of work into finding the right candidate. You go through all of these screenings and these interviews and you get them through the door, and usually the first day is this rush of excitement and then nothing. A lot of companies treat onboarding the way that actually my kids learned how to drive. So imagine that you have a teenager, and I have 2. And they went to driver's ed, but driver's ed consisted of 1 day of watching videos, 1 day of watching somebody drive, and maybe a couple of days of learning the ins and outs of the car. Would you feel comfortable with them driving you across the country or across Boston in an ice storm? Probably not. Yet this is how a lot of onboarding programs work in companies, is that they get put through the first couple of days of orientation, learning how the CRM works, learning how the other internal systems work, figuring out how to work the candy wall in the break room. And then they might also then shadow a couple of cold calls, maybe even make a few themselves, and then follow top performers. Except the problem is that then after about a week or so, then they're tasked with driving the revenue of their company and proving the kinds of numbers that they need to keep their job. So to say that it's high pressure is an understatement. To say that it's someone like Steve with a jack that it doesn't really quite work and gloves that don't quite fit and he has to get us from point A to point B is also happening. In fact, there's some companies that they don't even have an onboarding program at all. Last week I talked with a client who, after 6 months on the job, she was just now being sent to a training event. And that's what a lot of companies do. They wait until the next major training event to put all of the new sales hires through, and meanwhile it's weeks or months before they're giving any kind of direction or instruction or anything along those lines. It's a recipe for disaster. So here's what an onboarding program should look like. First of all, it has to be buyer-centric. It absolutely must be putting your salesperson in the world of your buyer, what their life is like, what their challenges are like, and even what their buying process is like. At HubSpot, one of the things that they do is they actually have their new hires build a 30-day business plan, build a website using their tools, use social media, create email campaigns, create blogs, all so that they are completely first-hand experience of the buyer's world. And that's not costly to do that in every company because, you know, I don't know about you, but there's no way that I'm going to use IT consulting software for anything in my business. However, what some companies do, and I've had clients do, is actually record interviews with customers that ask those very same questions, describing their role, describing what their role in their day-to-day life is like, describing the challenges that they had when they weren't able to do something, and how the solution that they bought from the company made their life better, and what things that they had to overcome in order to get that happen, and how they would even describe that experience to a peer. Having salespeople listen in on those kinds of conversation or recorded conversations gives them some idea of what the buyer's world is like. And also, if you're, for example, selling to the C-suite or the COO or the CFO, have your salespeople sit down and have conversations with those people in your company. You have them right there. They could be able to interview them, talk with them, and get inside of the buyer's world. Information chunking is basically saying that our brains can only handle small amounts of information at once. And unfortunately, that's not what happens in most sales training programs. How many of you have sat through a 45-minute webinar recently? How much of it did you remember an hour later? Or a day later? Or a week later? Exactly. 3/4 of new information gets lost within a week. And this is what happens with sales onboarding programs, is that a whole bunch of information is being crammed into their brains at once without any immediate reinforcement or application. Without that reinforcement and application, we lose it. And so breaking things up into short 15-minute chunks is the ideal way for us to learn. One way that you can do this in an onboarding program is to actually have an online program broken down into modules with each part of understanding the buyer, the value proposition, how they make decisions, and then using that to then do role plays, do simulations, do quizzes and certifications so that they can apply this new knowledge. And then when you integrate that in with a coaching program that's one-to-one with your team, they're getting the information in chunks, they're trying it out, and then they're going immediately into applying that with a coach, with an actual buyer, with a real conversation. That allows them to apply the knowledge and learn it before they're being set out into the world to try and do it themselves. And so it builds confidence in their ability to do so. It also helps them to retain the information. And if you have an online program, when your new hires come in, they don't have to wait for the next training event. They can be immediately plugged into that system, immediately matched up with their coach, and they can start learning real world, on the job, having an impact right away. The best thing about this is that it's easy to measure, it's easy to scale, it's easy to iterate that kind of learning so that you can then continuously improve. And that's how you can do onboarding, not as an event, but as a continuous process. Lastly is the real world application. And so learning happens according to the adult learning theory. 70% of it happens in the actual day-to-day doing of your job. So if it's something like, if you were in a scientific sales lab, you would have a classroom session where you would learn various concepts, and then they would put you into a lab where you actually started to do the experiment. And that's the real world application that we need to build into our onboarding programs. Again, if you use an online training module that's broken up, then you can start applying the coaching to that so that they can start really using the things that they're learning. On-the-job learning is one of the fastest ways to ramp up a salesperson quickly and efficiently. And then in addition to all of this, that real-world application, if you've gone through the scientific process of assessing a candidate before they come in and you know that these are the things that they're going to struggle with, you can break out which modules of your program will address the specific weaknesses that they have so that they're not being dumped into all of the same training that everybody else is getting, but it's actually customized to their specific role and their specific findings. So that is how you can successfully onboard and hire a salesperson. I have a couple of minutes for some questions. You will get a link in an email after this event that will have all of the resources that I've mentioned in there, including a free express screen. If you already have candidates that you're trying to hire, you can get a screening of those as well as a sample report that you can drill down into.